Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And I know I haven't uploaded in a couple of days, but it's been pretty busy. But this is a video that I think a lot of people have kind of been waiting for, and this is my Will It Fail video for Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, which is hitting theaters this December 16th, I believe. Um, and so there's been a lot surrounding this movie. I've made a few different videos about the stuff that's been going on with it, about the whole production uh, woes, all the leaks that came out, uh, all the leaks that had come out that said that 75% of the film was being that was being redone, that they had a bunch of different edits, that they were still shooting, a bunch of stuff like that. But for the sake of this argument, because we're trying to deal with facts here for the most part, I'm gonna kind of leave those leaks to the wayside. Now, at the end of the movie, at the end of the video, I'm going to try to take into account those those possible reshoots for the budget, but I'm going to give you two different numbers: one without the 75% reshoots and one with. So now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, let's kind of dive into this, and we kind of know what we're getting here. The director is J.J. Abrams, so it's probably just going to be a ripoff of a bunch of other stuff because that's kind of just what he does at this point. He hasn't really made anything very original in a long time, and honestly, The Force Awakens really is, for the most part, a retread of A New Hope in a lot of ways. And I don't expect amazing things out of him at this point as a director, and again, I think that that's more because of his previous work. Um, but it's something that I think that we have to take into consideration because he is a solid filmmaker in the sense that he knows how to make a movie. He knows how to construct a narrative in the sense that he knows how to actually make a story. The problem is that he can't make an original story. So if we're seeing this, it's probably not going to be anything that's too outside the box or too insane. It's probably going to be exactly what you think it is when you go in. So I don't necessarily take points off for him being the director, but I don't give them points for it either. Now, going into the stars, obviously you have the returning new stars, which is Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac. And this is, again, it is what it is at this point. We've seen them for two movies. John Boyega is probably going to continue to be a bumbling moron for this film. Daisy Ridley is going to continue to be a Mary Sue, and Oscar Isaac is going to continue to be whatever his character is at this point, because honestly, they don't really do much character development with him in any of Force Awakens. He was supposed to die, and they said, no, let's just bring him back in. Then Last Jedi, they take away one of the only things that made him interesting, which is his ability to pilot a ship in the opening act. And again, then they put that whole mutiny subplot in there, which again doesn't really develop him at all. It had a chance to, but it didn't. So I'm not sure what we're going to get with him, but the other two we're probably going to get the exact same thing that we've seen in the last couple of films. I just really hope they don't redo Finn's story arc again, because they've already done the exact same story arc twice with him now. And then you have the returning cast members from the old series, which is Carrie Fisher, who they're using. They're reconstructing scenes with her using footage that was not used in Force Awakens, and they're kind of in a corner on this, and I sympathize to a sense that they didn't expect Carrie Fisher to pass away as suddenly as she did. They expected her to be around for this film so that they could wrap up her story. And again, I get that. But I don't necessarily agree with the idea of keeping her in the film for an extended period of time. I think maybe just have a couple little scenes here, do a little tribute thing, and then have her go off into the sunset. I think that's the most tasteful way to do this. I think that's probably what they're going to wind up doing. Mark Hamill has come back for this film in some extent. We're not 100% sure exactly what's going on with him because he does the voiceover in the trailers, or at least the first trailer, and he's supposed to be dead, I assume, because I mean he died at the end of Last Jedi. He disappears at the end, kind of like what Yoda did in Obi-Wan. So we assume that he became the Force. So maybe he's back. He's probably back as a Force ghost, I'd imagine, something like that. So it's nothing that's too insane, but I doubt he will be in the movie for any extended period of time. And then you have the weird one, which is Ian McDiarmid. And here's the thing with this: they're bringing back Emperor Palpatine because Rian Johnson fucked this whole thing up, and he killed Snoke in his movie, and Snoke was supposed to be the big bad guy that was supposed to get a big reveal in the last movie or something like that, or this movie coming up, which would be the last movie in the trilogy. And Rian Johnson just unceremoniously killed him off in Last Jedi, and we really didn't learn anything about him at all. He was basically just kind of this very two-dimensional, villain. We didn't learn anything about his backstory. We didn't learn anything about how he came to the First Order or anything like that. There was no information that was ever given about him, and then he was just kind of axed off. So this is basically their kind of way to dig themselves out of the hole, but in reality they're kind of just digging themselves a deeper hole, because now you have to explain how the hell Palpatine survived episode 6 when he got thrown into the core of the second Death Star by Vader. Because we see, he falls down the hole, which is a matte painting, but he falls down the hole, and then you see this huge explosion of energy that shoots back up out as he's being vaporized, and then the entire thing explodes. So there's a lot of questions involving that, and that's the other thing that I kind of have a problem with J.J. Abrams is, you have that whole idea of the mystery box thing that he always talks about. And you can't have a mystery box in this scenario. You have to answer the questions. Again, he's a good setup guy in that sense. He's a good guy to kind of set things up and then let other people take the reins. I get that idea. But in this scenario, he has to answer the questions. And I'm not 100% certain he can answer all these questions, because there's a lot floating on this that, like, Palpatine, where has he been for the last, I think at this point it would be, about 35, almost 40 years? He's just been chilling on this planet, on this ocean planet within the Death Star wreckage, just waiting for some Jedi to show up. It's like, okay, this is just weird. But, I don't, again, the cast is what it is. I don't take points off for the newer cast members, because we already know what we're getting. If we're going to get the same thing, I'm not really, I can't, I mean, it's probably not going to be good, but again, I can't take points off for it, but I can't add any points for it. As for the classic actors, they're probably going to be reduced to cameo roles, except for Ian McDiarmid. And I take points off for Ian McDiarmid because, again, it weirdly circumvents Return of the Jedi in a bad way. So I kind of have to take points off for that. Now, let's just go into the production of this, because we all know that the production, I'm not going to go into the leak productions, we're just going to go into what we know. Now, what we do know is that originally Colin Trevorrow was going to be making this movie. He was the director of the first Jurassic World film, and he basically left the production because of differences with Disney, and we've learned over time that mainly stemmed from him having a vision at the end of the series, or at the end of this series of films. He basically had a rough treatment of his film written years before the film was going to come out. I think probably like 2017-ish, and Rian Johnson basically told him to go fuck himself, because the only thing that he wanted is he wanted him to not kill off Luke. Because that would kind of ruin his idea for the last film, and Rian Johnson told him to fuck off because Rian Johnson is a piece of dog shit. And not to mention the fact that there's definitely some friction between him and Abrams as well. And this ultimately led to Trevorrow exiting, and J.J. Abrams was brought on to finish off the trilogy because they literally couldn't find anybody else. And now we go to the actual production problems, where the script was written on the fly to the point where the script was not complete when they started filming, which is not good. You also had the fact that the production schedule for this film was 4 months shorter than for Force Awakens. And even though J.J. Abrams tends to come in ahead of schedule with his films by roughly about 2 months, Force Awakens, I believe, was 2 months, was finished 2 months ahead of schedule. Um, you're giving him a very small window in that sense to finish this, especially if there are extensive reshoots going on. So that's not good. And then on top of that, you were so rushed in the production process that you actually had to set up a suite for the editor on site to edit the dailies instead of sending them back to the studio where the editor has their editing suite. The editor was actually on site editing the film, which is nuts. You really never see that with anything, especially a AAA production where they send the dailies back to the studio, and the studio, they have everything set up there where the editor has everything at their fingertips, as opposed to this where you have to bring everything on site to wherever they're filming. So it's been a very odd and I'm assuming a very rushed, well, not assuming, but from what we know, a very rushed production. And that's never a good sign. So I will take points off for that. Now, as for the films leading up to this, obviously Force Awakens made a buttload of money. It's a very bland film. It's obviously a retread of A New Hope. Disney has admitted as such. But it did do something. It did reinvigorate Star Wars for a lot of people. A lot of people really enjoyed the film. I don't out and out hate the film. I have problems with it, but I don't hate it. And ultimately it introduced us to a lot of characters that had a lot of they had a lot of room to grow, and it introduced a lot of things that we weren't necessarily we didn't know at the time. So there was a lot of stuff that was there to be explored. And again, that's why I think Abrams is kind of a good setup guy. When the mystery box idea works from the extent when you're making something in a long format, to leave certain loose ends loose at the end of that first film to be tied up later on, because it gives people something to kind of not necessarily look forward to, but something to kind of read along in the narrative. It keeps people strung along a little bit, kind of like a television show. But again, that's something. Oh, and I forgot to mention with the cast too. Adam Driver is also returning as Kylo Ren to get his ass kicked for the third time in a row by Rey for whatever reason. So then you go to Last Jedi, which I've picked apart on this channel on numerous occasions, not necessarily in depth, but I picked it apart quite a bit. I think Rian Johnson is a hack director. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I think he is a decent director. I think he is a hack writer. I don't think he should be allowed to write a script for his own films, in the sense of, writing it solely by himself. Because when you have that situation, he literally used a first draft for The Last Jedi. You don't go into production with a first draft. That is insane. That is never done. For very obvious reasons, and you can see that in The Last Jedi. And the plot of the film suffers because of it. There's obvious social commentary in it that a lot of people did not appreciate. And ultimately, the film is a mess. It destroys a lot of the mystique and well, not mystique, but a lot of it answers a lot of the questions that were brought up in Force Awakens, but not in a satisfying manner. So ultimately, that's why that film, I think, made less money, because ultimately people really wanted to see it. They went and saw it, and then word of mouth spread around, and a lot of people decided not to go and see the film after its initial few weeks. And on top of that, it ultimately shit itself out in China so horribly that it was removed after 2 days. So it did not do well at all in that foreign market. And like I said, it made $700 million less than Force Awakens. And leading into this film, I think that's a problem, because you have screwed up all of those narrative points that Abrams had established in the first film that could have been expanded on in an interesting light. And now those points are either dead or they've been answered in an unsatisfactory way. So it's something that's a problem. And again, that's another thing I have to take off points for is, the sequel did not, the film that preceded this did not do very well in terms of pleasing the fan base. There are people that enjoy it, and I'm not going to say that those people are necessarily wrong for enjoying it, but there are objective reasons why the movie is not good. And now we go down to the really big one, which is the budget. And again, I had to go with estimates on this based on the previous films because there is no, most of the time we don't really know about the production budget or we don't know exact numbers. A lot of times we'll know a window. So since this is technically the longest Star Wars film ever made, I think it clocks in at 155 minutes, which is a little over 2.5 hours. And Last Jedi was the previous longest Star Wars film ever made. So I'm going to go with the higher end of the Last Jedi's budget, which is estimated at around 300 million. Now that is a huge budget for a film. That is incredibly huge. But as for that's what I'm going to go with because it's the high estimate from that. Now this is not counting in the quote unquote 75% remake or the 75% reshoot number. If I'm going to calculate that in, I'll probably place it around 400 million. So without it, it's 300. With it, it's 400. So the 300 million mark. That means that this film is probably going to have to make around $750 million to break even. If we're going by that. And again, the budget might be less than that, but I'm going to go with the high estimate because if it makes enough to break even or make a profit with the high estimate, then it definitely made enough to break even or make a profit with the low estimate. So you're going to have 750 million just to break even on this. And I think Disney 100% believes that this thing is going to break the billion mark. The only Star Wars film that has come out since Disney acquired the property to not break the billion mark was Solo, which was a box office flop. Now, if you're looking at the 400 million mark, it's a bit different because that means you're going to have to break. That means you're going to have to break $1 billion to break even, and that is not good. You don't want a production budget that makes it so you have to break $1 billion just to break even on the production. That is a horrible, horrible thing for a film because it will kill the movie. But as far as what I think this film will actually make, I think because of the negative reception that The Last Jedi caused, because of the vitriolic reaction, because of the failure of Solo, because not a lot of people have really bonded with these characters, and because J.J. Abrams' credentials as a director have been steadily decreasing over the years, I think this film is probably going to make about between 800, actually probably about $900 million. I think it will come close to breaking the billion mark. But I think that'll be the extent of it because we're seeing a trend with these films. You saw The Force Awakens, it made over $2 billion. Then you saw Last Jedi, it made $1.3 billion. Now you're going to see this, and I predict that it will have another drop, and I think it will drop below the billion mark, and that will be a major hit for Disney. Because even though that film, assuming it has the $300 million budget and not the $400, if that film fails to reach $1 billion, it will be a major failure in the eyes of the Disney brass, and they will not like that. And I think that ultimately, if it makes under $1 billion, it will be the death of the Star Wars franchise permanently. But that's my number. I think it's probably going to make somewhere in the 900 million range. So I want to know what you think. Are you excited for Rise of Skywalker? Do you think it's going to be good? Do you plan on going to see it opening weekend? Are you done with it after Last Jedi? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Again, I'd like to know what you're thinking. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button. Subscribe. And remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?